All right, well, now we will get started. So we have a prayer book that we use, and
I can send that to him.
okay, that'd be great. And Thomas, I did send you the outline book that we use for Buddhism 101. So I sent that to you in the mail today. Probably get it in June or July, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the sake of expediency, I'll lead the prayers tonight. So we'll start with the altruistic motivation. So we do it twice in English, once in Tibet.
This is in the chat box if anybody needs it.
All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, complete and precious Buddhahood. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Dagla dang war je pe dra no par je pe ge. Tar pa dang tam she ken pe par du cho par je pa tam she ki so je pe. Ma nam ka dam yam pe sem chen tam she de wa dang dem. Dog now dang drel nor du la na me pa yang dag par zog pe zhang zhu brin po she to pa sha. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Deshe du sang ma ge gi bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. Ma she bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. Du de ring de song te ni ma sang ta sam gi bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the Yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. We take refuge in the kind root and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the Yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. Transcend sawa dangur parje pe pa dan la ma dam pa nam la kab su chi o. Yedam kil gorgi la sok nam la kab su chi o. Sangye chom den de nam la kab su chi o. Dam pe cho nam la kab su chi o. Pa pe ge dun nam la kab su chi o. Pa wo ka jo cho kyung song me song yes she gi chang dang dem pa nam la kab su chi o. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Shangju Ningpo Chi Bar Sangye Namla Kapsu Chi Chodang Shangshub Sampayi So Klang Deshin Kapsu Chi Jitar Nonggi Deshegi Shangshub Tugni Ki Padan Shangshub Sempe La Pala De Dagrim Shin E Patar De Shindro La Pandandu Shangshub Samni Ki Gishing De Shindu Ni La Pala Rimpa Shindu La Pajio. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Chonamla Shangju Bardu Dagni Kapsuchi Dagi Jinsoki Pe Sonam Gi Jola Penshir Sangye Jupasho. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Manam kadam yam pe sam chen tam she dewa dang dewe gurdang dampa churchi. Dug now dang de now gi gu dang drel war churchi. Dug now me pe dewa dang mi drel war churchi. Nay ring jag dang ni dang drel wei tang nam la ne pa churchi. So everybody, please sit in the meditation position, whether it's on a cushion, on the floor, or you're sitting on a chair, wherever you might be. You can keep your back straight is the most important point of the posture. This is the 7-point posture of Varentana. Our legs can be crossed, or if we're sitting on a chair, our legs together or flat on the floor. Our shoulders back. Bringing our shoulders back brings our two hands, the left hand up and the right hand lying in the left hand, brings it into our abdomen, about 4 inches or so below our navel. And then our head is resting on our neck, of course, and just a little bit forward, our chin down. And then our eyes can be open or closed. If they're open, just to gaze in the direction of the nose, looking 3 or 4 or 5 feet in front of us on the floor, not looking at anything specific, just relax. If you close your eyes in the beginning is good, so to avoid any distraction. And the last point is to put your tongue up on the roof of your mouth behind your front teeth. So as you're breathing, your mouth will remain moist. You try and breathe in through both nostrils and exhale through both nostrils. But if you prefer to breathe, exhale through your mouth, that's fine. Whatever works for you is okay. So now in this position, we begin by taking a deep breath through both nostrils, filling our lungs with fresh, clean, pure air. And we expand our abdomen, which pulls down the diaphragm, which opens up the lungs and pulls in fresh, clean, pure air. And we hold that breath. Then we exhale, squeezing the abdomen, squeezes against the diaphragm, squeezes against the lungs and forces all the stale, negative, dark air out. And we hold that vacant breath. Breathe in again through both nostrils, expand the belly, expand the abdomen. Hold the breath. Exhale. Squeeze the belly, squeeze the abdomen. Push all that stale, negative, dark air out. And hold that breath. Breathe in. Hold it. Exhale. Hold it. That's 3. Breathe in. Fresh, clean, pure air coming in. You can visualize it as being white air or clear air, but it's completely pure. And we exhale stale, negative, dark air, squeeze it out. Hold it. That's 4. Breathe in. Exhale. Breathe in. Exhale. 6. In. Exhale. 7. Breathe in. Exhale. 8. Breathe in. Exhale. 9. Breathe in. 10. Exhale. 10. In. Out. 11. In. 12. Breathe out. Breathe in. Check your body position. Keep your back straight. Exhale. 13. In. 14. In. 15. Breathe in. Out. 16. In. Out. 17. In. Out. 18. In. Out. 15. Breathe in. Out. 20. Last cycle, breathe in very deeply. Hold it. Fresh, clean, pure air in our lungs. Exhale very completely. Negative, stale, dark air, and hold that empty breath. Now continue to remain in this posture. Breathe at your own speed. Watch your breath coming in, going out. Relax your mind. If your mind becomes distracted, just let the thought go and come back to watching the breath. Continue to watch the breath for another minute or two. Take a deep breath. Hold it. Raise your arms up over your head if you can. If you have any difficulty, please don't hurt yourself. Bring your hands together and look up through your hands at the ceiling and stretch your arms, stretch your back, stretch your neck. And then exhale and release your arms back down to your lap, back to your sides. Take a deep breath, raise your arms. Bring your hands together, look between your hands at the ceiling and stretch. Exhale, relax your arms. Take a deep breath. Raise your arms up over your head. Look between your hands. Stretch. Exhale. Relax your arms. Open your eyes. Okay. Thank you. So does anybody have any questions or comments about anything that we've talked about thus far? Last week, we talked about the afflicting emotions. Okay. And we're on chapter 3 of the Jewel Ornamental Liberation. So the first chapter was we have this, we have our primary cause as our Buddha nature. The second chapter is the working basis, our precious human life. Now, chapter 3 is the contributory cause, the spiritual master. So the spiritual master is there as a guide, as a teacher, someone that we can speak with, someone that we can receive teachings on fundamentals and practice. So we learned about what the 5 poisons are. So does anybody remember the 5 poisons? Can somebody tell me the first of the 5 poisons, what you might call the first? Gary? Your microphone is on, off.
Hatred.
Okay. Tom, how about you? What would the second one be?
Desire.
Okay. Ed, you got your microphone off. Do you remember one of the 5 poisons?
Anger, ignorance, pride, envy.
Okay. Thank you. Katie, how about you? Do you remember one of the 5 poisons that was left out so far?
Greed.
Greed. Okay. Anybody else? Jackie?
I think we said them all: hatred, desire, ignorance, greed, and envy, right?
I didn't, I missed ignorance then. I didn't hear the ignorance. So delusion, ignorance. So these are the 5 poisons, and these are the 5 constituent parts of all the emotions, the afflictive emotions that we as human beings suffer from. So it's very important to understand these and to understand the antidotes to these poisons. So what is the antidote to ignorance or delusion? Does anybody remember that? Jackie?
Education.
Right. Okay, very good. Grant, are you with us tonight?
Yes.
Do you remember the antidote to desire?
No, but I can read it. Faults of
Okay.
samsara.
Okay, the suffering of samsara, the faults of samsara, yes. Okay. What is the antidote to hatred? Anybody remember that?
Loving kindness.
Loving kindness, yes. And greed, what is the antidote to greed? Bhavani, what is the antidote to greed?
Generosity.
Generosity, yes. And what is the antidote to envy or jealousy? Does anybody remember that? Rebecca, do you remember that? Okay, well, Rebecca is taking a break. Okay. Thomas, Bringhurst, do you know the antidote to jealousy and envy?
Equanimity.
Okay, it would be fearlessness, having fearlessness. And then the 5 wisdoms that are developed, that are the perfection of the 5 wisdoms, come from the constant practice of using the antidotes to overcome the poisons. We develop these 5 wisdoms, these 5 perfect wisdoms that are actually identified characteristic of the 5 Buddha families, of the 5 Buddhas. So if I say the wisdom of mirror-like wisdom, the mirror-like wisdom, what poison is that associated with?
Hatred.
Hatred, yes. And what if I say the wisdom of discriminating awareness? What does that apply to? Where does that come from?
Desire.
Yes. Okay, I can tell you're reading the book. That's okay. Okay, and then what about all-pervading wisdom? Jackie, I know you wanted to say something. What is all-pervading wisdom? What does that result from?
That would be tied to ignorance.
Correct. And the wisdom of equanimity. William, what does that come from? The wisdom of equanimity.
That comes from greed.
Yes. And the all-accomplishing wisdom. Michael? The all-accomplishing wisdom.
Envy.
Envy and jealousy, yes.
Mhm.
So this chart, these 5 points, these 5 poisons, the 5 antidotes, and the 5 wisdoms, we really need to memorize. We really need to know these, because everything is a product of these functions of being able to recognize the poisons, being able to apply the antidotes, and to cultivate the wisdoms. So this is being on the path to enlightenment. So it is the teacher, it is the spiritual master who points these out to us. So whether we read these or we hear these in a teaching like this, or we need to be reminded of these. And this is the function of the spiritual master, to point these out and help us with this. So if we were able to do this alone by ourselves, therefore, we wouldn't need the master. But I think all of us do need the master at whatever level we're on, to keep us fully engaged in being able to look at ourselves, to be objective. So we become the master. We become our own master, but we have a teacher to show us how to do that. So we need to embrace that, the contributory cause for enlightenment.
What does all accomplishing mean?
We can accomplish virtually anything that we want. It's a question of what it is that we need to do and what it is that we want to do. We are jealous because we feel like we're inadequate. We can't attain something. We can't have something. And usually it's because of our fearfulness or our poor self-image that we're unable to do something. So it just feeds back on us, and it stays in the back of our mind and festers and so on. But if we see that we want something, that we should go ahead and we should make it a priority to go and try and understand what that is, and start going for that, start trying to accomplish that. We may get to a point where we realize we're on the right path and we need to continue to be able to successfully acquire that which we were looking for. On the other hand, we may get somewhere along that pathway to attain that and realize we made a mistake. And by realizing that and saying, you know what, it's not what I thought it was. It's not what I wanted. And it's not what I need. I really need to pull back. I made a mistake and let me start some other way. So now we've attained some wisdom in accomplishment that there's not everything that we want do we need to have. So we need to be able to recognize the subtle differences and be able to have the wisdom of being able to do that. So the all-accomplishing wisdom is that we can accomplish anything we need to. It's all within ourselves. And we just need to be able to recognize what it is that is important, what the priorities are.
Thanks.
So there's 3 levels of master. So I'm looking at the outline book on page 6. So here in the Jewel Ornamental Liberation, it's explained there's 3 levels of the master. There's the Buddha's spiritual master, who have taken birth and form, and those who are meditational deities and embody the perfection of the purifications, possessing the primordial unborn wisdom, the paramita. So in other words, there's the Buddhas, there's the great beings who have gone through this whole process of becoming enlightened. And they were human beings to begin with. And they entered the path, they became bodhisattvas, and then they were able to liberate themselves through their transcendence to become Buddhas. And they come to us in a way of teachings. They come to us in a way of the embodiment of beings. Of some of our great teachers are the embodiment, are living Buddhas, and so on. So we come to recognize them. We come to recognize them with the meditational Buddhas, those Buddhas who we sort of imagine, that we visualize through all the iconography and learning their different qualities and so on, their different activities. And we begin to recognize that all those things are within ourselves. So we have the examples of what it is to be a pure Buddha. And so these are the Buddha spiritual masters that are pure in that way. Then there's the Bodhisattva spiritual master, who is higher level form beings who possess varying amounts of wisdom and purification. So as human beings, we enter this path of practice, of purification, of bringing in the teachings and assimilating the teachings and so on. And as we get to a certain point, we become a bodhisattva, a holy enlightened being. And we are still human beings. We're still going through our practices and purifications. We're working on those emotions. We're breaking through those emotions. We're working on the wisdom and so forth. But we can still be a bodhisattva, which is a very important thing. There are 8 great bodhisattvas who are purified bodhisattvas, who are perfected bodhisattvas, who hold back from becoming Buddhas in order to be able to help ordinary human beings to recognize what it is that they need to do. And we learn what the 8 great bodhisattvas are. They help us to realize that we have to cultivate ourselves. We have to cultivate our mind. We have to cultivate our heart. We have to cultivate our body, speech, and mind. We do that through loving kindness, through grace. To be able to do that, we educate ourselves. Then we have a devotion to do this, and the devotion leads us to our transformation. That because we are working hard to do this, because of our devotion, we go through transformation. We can see changes in ourselves, and we do this, and we gain wisdom, and we gain the ability for compassion. So these are all identified by these 8 great bodhisattvas. And then we come to recognize the power of being able to do this. And as we actualize this power, then we are able to achieve the purification over and over and over again. Everything that we go through during the lifetime that we have, we're refining over and over and over again. So these 8 activities are identified by the 8 great bodhisattvas. We'll talk more about them later on in subsequent talks that we have, but they are perfected bodhisattvas who have perfected what it is to be a human being and are therefore being able to help human beings to be on the path to enlightenment. And then there's the ordinary spiritual master. The ordinary spiritual master are the lay people, are the teachers, are the lamas, are the people that we meet, our brothers and sisters and so on, and that we are receiving teachings from. So they are leading us to understand, to recognize the meditation of the bodhisattvas and to recognize the Buddhas. But we need to have those that can communicate with us, those that can see us, those we can talk to be able to understand this if we haven't been able to do it on our own. So the ordinary spiritual master is broken down as 3 types. And it says those who possess 8 qualities. So the 8 qualities are the moral ethics of the bodhisattva, who's learned in the bodhisattva teachings, who possesses realization, someone who has possesses compassion and kindness, who possesses fearlessness, someone who practices patience and who practices an untiring mind. They have great perseverance, and they're expert in verbal exchange, verbal expression, and so on. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about are embodied in these teachers. And we have respect for those that we encounter and say, oh, you know, this is someone who has had great experience in being able to understand these fundamentals and be able to teach these fundamentals to us and so on. So these are these 8 qualities. So we look at those in ourselves, and we look at those with our teachers. And then it says those who possess the 4 qualities, who possess great scholarship, who dispel doubt, to whatever he or she says is acceptable, an action of pure virtue. In other words, that we recognize that they are speaking from a position of virtue and not from non-virtue. And that they are able to distinguish between the 2 realities of virtue and non-virtue, or nirvana and samsara. So these beings have an awareness, have realization, and we invite them to be our teachers because of this. And then those who possess the 2 qualities, that they are expert in the Mahayana teachings and will not abandon the Bodhisattva's vow. So the Mahayana teachings are the middle way teachings, the way of the Bodhisattva, and that they will not abandon this Bodhisattva vow, that they have made vows and they stay on the path, and they're there to help all beings as best as they can and as best as we can accept them. So going through and familiarizing yourself with this, understanding this to whatever degree we can right now, and keeping this in our mind and coming back and refreshing ourselves every couple months or something like that. And we see that we become more and more, we have these qualities. So we're developing these qualities ourselves. And we're meeting new teachers and bringing them into our lives and so on. So we see that there's many, many, many different people from which we can receive teachings there in the temple, through our brothers and sisters, through the books we read, and so on like that. So it's making yourself aware, making yourself open, recognizing these things, understanding these qualities, these activities, and these virtues. So the contributory cause are these masters, the cause for us to attain enlightenment. And the methods that they use are, they're listed here. It says, One is attending the master through respect and service. Another one says attending the master through devotion and reverence. Couldn't read it. And attending the master through practice and persistence in the teachings. So this is the method that we engage with the master, that we're helping them, we're working with them, we're building a relationship with these teachers in all different ways. Sometimes it's just like, helping them in the shrine room. Maybe it's helping them prepare for teachings. Maybe it's helping them to set up the offerings in the shrine room. Maybe it's printing books. Maybe it's engaging in conversation with the teachers and with other people that come in, when new people come in, and greeting them and talking with them and so on. So it's having the devotion and the reverence for the teacher, to have this respect that they have worked very hard to get to the point where they can begin to teach other beings and so on. So we have devotion for that and reverence for that, respect for that. We show that in many different ways through our generosity and our participation again in the events that they are making for our benefit. So, and that's the attending the master through practice and in the teachings and so on. So there's
Lance,
yes, sir.
I mean, this is Grant.
Yes.
So the devotion and reverence, I mean, it talks in the book about that means that one should regard the spiritual master as the Buddha. So you have this, I guess, unique form of Tibetan Buddhism where you have this guru devotion, which is, to me, very unlike the Theravada and the other Mahai and Buddhism. I don't know. Could you speak a little bit of that? Regarding the spiritual master as the Buddha?
Well, when we're in the temple and we're receiving the teachings, or we're on Zoom and we're imagining that we are in the temple, that we are in the shrine room along with the master, and the master is usually sitting on a throne. And, I'm talking about someone like Garchen Rinpoche, or maybe Khenpo Samdup, or Drupal Trungpa Ningpo, or many, many other masters that we know, His Holiness Chögyam Rinpoche. There's many, many different masters. And when they are in that situation, we view them as the Buddha, that they have taken a vow to purify themselves and to be able to actualize, express the teachings that they are so familiar with, to be able to share with us. And we're visualizing what they are saying and who they are at that particular time as being the Buddha, as being an expression of the Buddha. In many cases, when for the teachings and for the empowerments, the master has gone through a whole process before we even got to the shrine room. They might have spent an hour or 2 hours preparing themselves for the empowerment. So we call that their self-empowerment of the master. So as I say, we don't see that, but when we go in, we just have the devotion to them, that what they are doing is pure, virtuous, and as the Buddha is. So it's very important for us to visualize that. Now, your question partly was, what about in the Theravadan and in the Mahayana traditions? I'm not as familiar with that. I'm very familiar with the Vajrayana traditions. And in the Vajrayana traditions, it's exactly what I just said. How they do it in the Theravadan, I don't know. They don't do the same level of teachings. They don't do it in the same way with the Mahayana. Maybe Tom can speak to that, because I know he's attended many Mahayana teachings. Maybe there's some other folks here that can speak to that. Michael, William, and Bhavani may be able to speak to that. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? Tom?
Try to rephrase the question.
What was that?
Rephrase the question.
The question was, have you experienced, how it is that the teachers, the venerables might teach in the Theravadan or the Mahayana Pure Land environment? Tom, did you have anything that you could add to that?
Usually in the Mahayana tradition, the master is usually on a throne as well, given the teachings, and when they are teaching, they are seen as no different from a Buddha, because they are basically reading sutras and conveying that exact same words to all the pupil. So there is no difference. They're just using a different body to do it, but we recognize the teachings and the form that it's going through as the Buddha.
Do they teach from their own experience at all?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. Oh, certainly. And like I said, I mean, they're when they're off the throne, it's it's quite different. But once they're on the throne and giving the teachings, they are definitely seen and respected as you would a Buddha. No different.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Did
Mhm.
anybody else? William, did you have anything to add to that?
My thing is mainly with a yoga master, and I noted we were more we had more contact with him than we have had with the people here with the Buddhist temple, although we had pretty good amount of contact there. And the contact with the Buddhist temple, the teachers in that were pretty much the same as you sitting there talking back and forth to one another, more so than like the stories and things that the yoga teacher would tell, which everything was in their mind and in their being. They understood, and they have gone through with the things that were being taught. But
Were you viewing them as then the Buddha, that they were an emanation of the Buddha at that point when they were teaching like that?
Yeah, more or less. And then when we had an opportunity, the master flew in and stayed here at the airport, and we had an opportunity to stay with him. And one of the things that I noticed was that he had gone into meditation, and he seemed to be, every time that I seen him, he seems to have gone into a meditative state. And he'll talk to you, but the questions that you have are like kind of melted away, because you kind of understand by being with the master how things are. But then when you walk away and you get out of the master's aura or what have you, you forget everything.
Yeah, we would call those the master's blessings.
Yeah,
You know, like if you schedule an
Yeah.
interview with a master like that, and if you don't write your questions down, as soon as you get with them, you're sitting there and your mind just goes blank because you're receiving their blessings, their heart blessings. It just scoops you right up. So yes.
one
Yeah,
of the
you have
things,
no questions at that time.
but one of the things that the master master monk of the Vietnamese temple there,
And that's Pure Land.
he would have tea, and we would have tea with him.
Mhm.
And there was a discussion of what I would say would be just trivial things, but oh, my car had a flat tire, or, some ridiculous little trauma that happened, and it's like it doesn't matter. It never did matter. Why are you so upset about it?
Well, no, in developing a relationship with these teachers, it's really great to invite them to your home. Make a meal for them. Maybe you'll take them out for lunch, or take them to a restaurant or something, or bring them to your house. And sometimes even if you live far away, and maybe they'll come and spend a day or two with you, and if that's convenient, but so much is experienced by being with them in that kind of an environment, in your environment, where they come in and maybe they get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and they do their practice and so on. And you really get to see how it is that they behave, what their conduct is like in an everyday setting. And many people get many teachings that way, more than what they might through the books and so on. Some people aren't good studiers. Some people aren't good readers. Some people aren't good practitioners, but yet they will be generous and they will host the Lama coming to their home, like I'm saying, and they, through that kind of experience, they gain a great deal of merit. So we had a teacher who used to say there were people that would cook, when there would be a big retreat at the center, and would say that the cooks are getting more merit, more benefit from the retreat than the people who are sitting in the shrine room with the Lama, because they are not participating in that way, but they are making sure that everybody is fed and so on. And that's a great thing to be able to do. So those are methods of being able to help the master and so on. So Grant, to answer your question, it sounds like, that from the Theravada and definitely the middle path of the Mahayana, it's very much the same, that they are visualized as being the Buddha at that particular time. And as you get to know them, you begin to, see just how, how much more they might be like that, even when they're sitting around talking and so on, and how they behave and so on. So it's, my experience has been amazing in that. What are their conversations like?
I mean, there are some Mahayana sects where the priesthood and the ministers are considered husbanders, and they don't sit on a throne. They sit at an even level on the altar when they do sit with the minister's assistants. And although we recognize them as having Buddha nature, the tradition is through Japanese Mahayana that all the great leaders going back to the 700s and 800s and before have just declared themselves old fools, that they really know nothing, that they're not the Buddha, that they don't know why people come and listen to them, and they're basically paupers and mendicants, and so they don't hold themselves to be at that high level, and they're not really treated that way. So in the Pure Land Mahayana, that in my experience, the ministers and the priests consider themselves the servants, and they're chosen by the larger traditions, because the temples are handed down from one male to the next in the families. So there's no throne there, and in Theravada there's no throne in Tibet anyway, either. So it's purely the monastics in Theravada that are responsible for passing on the traditions and doing the teachings, and they consider themselves servants as well. They're ordained monastics, so they're the keepers of the secrets, they're the keepers of the Tripitaka, and they're the ones who should know the literature and interpret the literature for the people. But they don't sit on thrones either, nor are they looked at as temporary emanations of the Buddha. And I think that has to do with the Theravada and the Mahayana being both levels of Buddhism that have had to work very hard to reach into the public, starting before people could read. So they're commoners, and they act like human beings, and their expertise comes from their prestige comes from inheriting their position in the lineage, and from their stature in the faith, their stature in the organization. So I'm sure there's lots of other diversity, and there may be some Theravadan subsects in Singapore or Malaysia, perhaps, where folks will sit up on a throne, because there are some subsects where it's a little more elaborate. There are crowns and things, but not in my experience with my wife's Thai forest tradition, or in the two Mahayana traditions that I'm familiar with.
Well, it's very good. Thank you. That's very interesting. Anybody else have any comment? Grant, did this maybe answer your question to some degree?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe it had to do with like the Indian Hinduism Thai, where you have the Hindu guru who is takes on the deity. The guru is sort of not the Buddha, but is the Hindu god. And I was thinking maybe that was where the Tibetan tradition had a tie-in, but.
Well, we'll talk about that later on, talking about, deity yoga. Deity yoga, yoga means union, and deity, of course, is that, the holiness within ourselves, and we become in union with that. And there's what we might call a divine pride that comes out of that as we recognize ourselves as the deity. And certainly in Vajrayana, that's an important feature of the practice. That's what actually is unique about it as compared to the Mahayana or compared to the Theravadan, that it does this deity yoga. So there seems to be a similarity there, because I'm not as familiar with the Hindu as you just said, so I can't say that that's where it came from, but they do think that way. And it's there for us all to be able to do. That's part of being on the path, is to recognize ourselves as the deity. Okay. So, so the way in which we do this, so talking again about the method of how we do this. So we've been talking about how to visualize the master, how to visualize the teacher, the guru. And now, what do we need to do as the student, as the disciple, to prepare for this? So it says here that we need to remind ourselves of our bodhicitta, of what our aspiration is, what our motivation is. So we need to invoke the prayers that we use, the opening prayers, the altruistic motivation, the action bodhicitta prayer, etc., that we say with heartfelt devotion and remembering what our motivation, why we're doing this, and so on. So it's important to do that. So we begin with that. And then we engage in the actual teaching, where you are the patient and the medicine is the Dharma and the teacher is the physician, and you are recovering from an illness. So here this analogy is that here we are sick and we're going to meet the doctor, and the doctor is dispensing the medicine. So the doctor is the teacher, the guru, and he is dispensing the medicine, which is the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. And that we are healing ourselves from whatever illness we have, in particular, the 84,000 emotions that we've talked about, and the obscuration to wisdom. So we're healing ourselves from those afflictions, those obscurations. And then it says the consequences to be avoided. So this is very interesting. When we are in a teaching situation, that we should think of a pot. It can be a ceramic pot, or it can be a metal pot, but there's a pot. And in this pot, we turn the pot upside down, and all the teachings are coming toward this pot. But if the pot is upside down, nothing goes inside the pot, because all the teachings just bounce right off of the bottom, which is now upside, and nothing goes into the pot. So we're like that pot that's upside down if we're not paying attention to the teachings. Another example is the pot is right side up, but the pot has a bunch of holes in it. So whatever comes in, whatever teachings come in, they just leak right out through the holes, because we're not paying attention, and we're not thinking, we're not contemplating, we're not absorbing what the teachings are. So they just leak out like a leaky pot. And then the other example is that the pot is a normal pot with no leaks or anything like that, but there's poison inside of the pot, so that the teachings come in, and that this, whatever that poison is, contaminates those teachings. So if we have arrogance, if we have predisposed ideas of what we think we should be hearing and doing and so on, that we're contaminating those teachings, so those teachings become poison. So we have to look at ourselves as that pot, upside down, have holes in it, or is it poison and contaminating that which is coming in? So we need to be aware of these things and prepare ourselves for the virtuous teachings that are being bestowed in our behalf. And this is the compassion of the master, that they are spending so much time, their lifetime has been devoted to being able to understand and teach the Dharma, and now they are imparting it with us. So we have devotion for that. So the benefits of this, of the contributory causes of the master, the benefits are that a bodhisattva who is well guided by spiritual masters, so that we become a bodhisattva, a holy enlightened being, having been guided by these spiritual masters. And we will not fall into the lower realms. So the hungry ghost realm, the hell realms and the animal realms that will prevent us from falling into those realms, that will stay in the higher realms if we do this successfully, and that we will not fall into the hands of evil persons, that we won't be seduced in our mind or our body, in any other way into following non-virtue, that we will have a sense of morality, a sense of propriety, and a sense of dedication to our practice and to our teachings and so on. So we won't be negatively influenced by negative people, by non-virtuous people. And that we will not turn away from the Mahayana path. The Mahayana path is the middle way path. So we won't turn away from that. And this is, very important. This is the part where we are able to do for others, that by doing for others is how we attain enlightenment, by having the aspiration for others and being able that everything that comes to us, everything that we learn, everything that we're able to do, whatever activity flows right through us for the benefit of the enlightenment of other beings. So this is the hallmark of the Mahayana path, of the middle way path. So we won't turn away from that. And then we'll go beyond the ordinary person's level. So the ordinary person is like we talked about in the very beginning when we were talking about the 5 families of the Buddha. And we talked about the disconnected family, we talked about the dubious family, and we talked about the solitary realizers, so the disconnected people, the disconnected family, are those who have no respect for the teachers, have no respect for the Dharma, have no desire, no aspiration to be able to understand it, and they push it away, and they will disparage the teachings and disparage other people who follow the teachings. So we will go beyond that. We're going beyond that. If we can have a positive influence on people like that by showing them our virtue, by showing them our moral ethics and our generosity and so on, that's wonderful. That's really, really good. But we need to move ourselves in that direction to be a good, wholesome person, to be a complete human being, and not just a being of the physical and a person of the intellect, but to be a spiritual person as well. So these are the 4 benefits that are derived from the spiritual master. So this chapter, it might seem like it's very, easy to take for granted that, oh yeah, I knew that, but it's something to think about, because by engaging in all these different things that we've talked about here and reminding ourselves of these things, we see how these things really do matter. And it's a matter of our attitude that makes the difference, that we have to engage in this. We have to engage in this devotion. We have to engage in the contemplation and so on. Otherwise, the teachers are not going to come running after us. The brothers and sisters are not going to come running after us. I've said before that when, in the old country, when you're in the monastery and you go in for a teaching, you may not know what the teaching is going to be, and you're with maybe 10 or 15 or 20 other people who like you, and you're just sitting there, and the master comes in and is sitting down, and he goes into a meditation, and he will remain in the meditation until somebody asks him a question, and then he'll begin to teach. So the point here is that we have to engage the teacher. So in the West, things have been modified a little bit because the people aren't used to that kind of a procedure where we have to ask the teacher for the teaching like that. But slowly, those of us who are familiar with this are trying to impart this, because that's a good part of their culture that we need to bring into our culture. for our children and for their children and so on. This is where we see that the Eastern cultures are going to intermingle and morph with the Western cultures. And for the sake of our children, for their children and their children's children and so on like that. The changes that are going to make in the next 100 years, 50 years, 200 years and so on like that. What do we want that to be? So we need to engage teachers to be able to do that. We need to become teachers to be able to help do that. So before we can become teachers, we need to be students. So that's this chapter 3. So please, let's talk about this. Anybody have any thoughts about this?
Lance,
Yes.
a practical question. How much time does Kempo in a typical year, how much time does he reside at our temple?
Well, this a typical year, it was about 6 months. Maybe not in one fell swoop. I mean, he would come and stay with us for maybe 6 weeks or something, and then he would go off to one of the other Dharma centers. He has Dharma centers in Ohio. He has Dharma centers in Vancouver, Canada. He has Dharma center in Michigan. He has Dharma center in Hawaii. He has Dharma center in Mexico. And plus, he would go and be with Garchen Rinpoche. So most of the year he was staying with us, but he would go and come back and so on, is the answer to that question.
Thank you.
One thing that we are working on is to have other monastics who are there all the time. So we've invited 2 nuns, very accomplished nuns from the Songden nunnery in Dehradun, India, to come and live and to be there at the center and to lead practices and help with teachings and help, facilitate the Dharma center and so on. So the COVID has interrupted what was in place for that. So maybe this next year we'll see that that's going to happen. So somebody else.
I was just going to mention something that you were talking about, the master coming and sitting and getting into a state where he would be prepared to give talks, and our teachers that are English or American or something other than from that culture, don't get the information from the same place. They and I don't know exactly how to step out the difference, but when the teacher is in that space, he's able to touch on any type of thing that there is. And most of the teachers that are American or English or whatever haven't gotten to get into that space, and their presentations are usually from memory rather than from actual life, living changes or whatever.
Well, I think to some degree that's true for many. I think some people have have true experience, have true realization, although they weren't trained in the East. You know, the Dharma is for everybody, and you can experience it wherever you are. And depending on your particular situation, your particular karma, and so on, and many people can attain it in different ways. However, you know, they may not be able to express it because they haven't been trained to express it in the same way that the ordained may have been taught to express it. Those who, you know, were brought up in India or brought up in Tibet or in any of the monasteries and so on like that, they may not be able to express it in those ways. But we should always have an open mind that everybody is Buddha, and that Buddha can speak to us all in ways that are very, very subtle. And we should treat everybody in that way, and not, you know, disparage anybody or say they're not a qualified teacher because they're not wearing robes or they haven't trained, you know, with certain teachers or something like that. There's respect to have for those that have done that, no doubt. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I'm just pointing out that there's many people among us who are very pure, virtuous beings who have great wisdom, and but they may not have come to the point of realizing the Dharma yet. So we need to recognize that all the time, I think.
Many of the monks that we've come to know, Lance, from the temples here where we live are in Vietnam. They went into the monastery when they were 7 and 8 years old.
Sure.
And they grew up their whole lives learning and studying. The same with the forest monk from Sri Lanka. That was their life.
Yeah.
And they walk and talk the teachings, whether they're in the temple or riding in the car with them. They're always living the teachings.
Sure. Yeah, we have to have great respect for that. Thomas, did you have something?
Yes, I heard a story from a student of Chogyal Namkai Norba Rinpoche the other day. And she said that one time, one of the monks came through Seattle. And prior to Seattle, he'd just been in a monastic situation, and he got on the plane. He was invited, got on the plane, got to Seattle, and he had to stay for a couple days with students like we are in Seattle. And one of the things that he disclosed was, he said all the time that he was in the monastery, they were reading text and they were chanting and they were saying prayers, and he never comprehended what suffering was until he had come through Seattle and spent a couple days in their house. He wasn't putting them down. He was just saying that his experience in the monastery was very different from the everyday world that we live in, which she thought, the student thought, was a great insight, a great, opened her mind up. And so I'm just sharing that.
So you're saying that monk was experiencing our lifestyle as suffering. Is that correct?
He was witnessing the way that things were going on.
As suffering.
And yes, and he
never saw that suffering when he was in the monastery.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. Sure.
And also Michael Roach, there's been some different comments about him over the years, but he's an American, and he went to India, and he studied for several years, and he earned his Geshe degree. And he's fluent in Tibetan. He can read it, he can write it, he can teach it. And he was in the diamond business. And he made enough money in the diamond business so that, at least in New York, he sponsored a group where they did translation. He purchased the computers and the office space and taught them to read and to start doing. He gave them little segments of things. So he's, by many accounts, he's the real deal. He's an American that had the training in a monastery. In other words, he wasn't just giving an Americanized version of what was going on.
Okay, very good. Yeah, there's lots like that, I'm sure. Ed, from a professional point of view, what do you think, about, because you're an educator, and dealing with students and institutions and so on that are educational institutions and so on, how do you relate this idea of the spiritual master to what you're familiar with in the West?
Well, I may be an educator in some places. I'm definitely a student here. I think I was interested in your comment about the model in the West seems to be to, well, there's less initiative on the part, there's not an emphasis on initiative by the student to engage the teacher. I mean, the tradition is more listen to the teacher, and the teacher disseminates wisdom, and you soak it up and go your own way, rather than bringing to the teacher or the master, I mean, your own questions, your own proactivity. Now,
what do you think of that?
I think that that's I think that's a disappointing aspect of much of the tradition in Western teaching. I mean, that we don't expect learners to be as proactive as they need to be. We encourage them to be more like just vessels that receive whatever the teacher gives out. I don't know. I'm over my head here, Lance.
Well, no, I think that's a really good point. And is it a kind of point that is something that needs to be embraced in the West?
Yes.
And say, look, maybe our approach to learning has been wrong, and the student should be more proactive in what it is that they want to learn, and to engage the teacher. And so they kind of invest themselves in the process much greater than we do now.
Well, there's a distinction in some circles between what's called vertical learning, which is learning that's passed down from whoever's assigned to dispense the knowledge, and horizontal learning, where everybody's a learner, but everybody's also a resource. And part of being a resource is to, both to oneself and to other learners, is to engage the teacher in a proactive way. I mean, rather than just sit passively and let the teacher dispense his or her knowledge.
So it seems to me, hearing you just give those two examples of the vertical and the horizontal, it seems to me that it's best to have a vertical process in place, but one that is horizontally, becomes a, that we engage with each other and we talk, we have meetings with each other and discussions and so on with each other.
Yeah, on the other, I don't know how much you want to continue this discussion, but there's also a distinction between, I mean, these are just words that are out there. Well, no, they're concepts, but between nurturant learning and content learning.
Okay.
In other words, how much in a learning transaction, how much is it about just passing knowledge, from an expert to people who are not experts? And how much is it about fostering an attitude of inquiry that allows the learner to go forward in an inquiring state of mind, which she is more apt to do if they're encouraged to do that in the teaching learning settings. It's more apt to go out of that setting, with an inquiring mind rather than just a vessel filled up with information.
What were those two names you just called that?
Content and nurturant. Like I used to be a T-ball coach. I mean, when my kids were 5, 6, 7 years old, I finally concluded that in T-ball, it's virtually all nurturant learning.
Right.
In other words, you want the kid to play next year.
Right.
Or if he doesn't want to play, it's because he's taking piano lessons or it's something he'd rather do.
Right.
So you reinforce everything. If he runs the wrong way, you compliment him on how fast he ran, but let's try to do it toward first base rather than third. I mean, that's all nurture. And you get into other settings which are virtually all content, like like I was when I was in Naval OCS, there wasn't a lot of nurture going on.
Right.
It was sort of pound you, yeah.
What would you say, with our current situation, if I can, paint with a broad brush here and say that, here we are, and it's not just with Buddhism, but it's just, it seems our nation, or maybe it's the world, seems to be in this spiritual malaise right now. And maybe it's lasted it's been sinking downward now for several generations. How do you think we reinvigorate that? Or do you think that we should invigorate that it should just follow its own course and let it go where it goes?
Well, I'm sensitive here, Lance, that folks didn't sign on tonight to hear me.
No, I think it's relative to the spiritual master.
Yeah.
Because the spiritual master has to ask these questions and answer these questions to be the spiritual master. They have to understand the dynamics of the student master relationship.
I think what is your saying about the little mind and the big mind, or the
we have this intellectual little mind,
right,
but we have this spiritual big mind,
right?
But the intellectual big mind or the intellectual little mind can be such an influence that it blocks up.
I think our formal educational practice is too much aimed at the little mind. If it doesn't matter to me, I'm not going to attend to it that well. I'm not going to retain it. It has to be meaningful in terms of my own growth. I have to perceive it that way, and I do that through the mind of the heart rather than, I don't know.
All right. No, that's very good. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have some thoughts on this? Because I think, as I said, it's very relevant to our situation.
I have a couple thoughts about what you're saying. One thought is that here in Florida, there was one of the legislators was bitching about college content, and he wanted it trimmed down, less humanities, less this, less that, more STEM, and job training. Well, not everybody agrees that university training should be job training.
Right.
The idea at one time was liberal arts, and you became without going into a whole long story, you have a much broader experience if you've gone through that sort of approach. So politically, um, the politicians are not on this, most politicians are not on the side of, expanding the mind or having a broader view or a
Right.
broader base. It's get the certificate and get out there and
Right.
get a job and be productive.
Right.
So that's one thing. Another thing, somebody was talking the other day about all of the chaos in the world, but in the newspaper business, it used to be, if it bleeds, it leads. So they're always reporting, not always, most of the time they're reporting sensational stuff.
Sensationalism, yeah.
They're not digging deep into it.
Right.
And so since, people are walking around with their cell phone, and we have the computers and the TV, and so the transmission of some sensational thing is like instantaneous, and it gets to more people. So people see that and they can take that bit of evidence and say, oh, the world is going to hell, stuff like that. And you have the older tradition that says this is the Kali Yoga. But on the other hand, if everybody was our mother, which is stated different times, and there's more of us than ever, then there's a lot of mothers that are around, and there's a lot of experience that's been gained, and a lot of karma that's been worked out, and there's more teachers than there have ever been, and more people are receiving Dharma teachings. So that looks like it's going in a very positive direction, rather than, oh my God, what is happening?
Okay, I want to invite some other people who haven't talked yet to get into the conversation. Zara, you haven't said anything. Rebecca, Jackie, I'd like to hear from you, please. Kate and Kate. Soho.
I'd like to just stand on a few things that Ed said, and I think one of the differences in this sort of spectrum of approaches from top down or horizontal, or from the difference of just filling somebody's head, as if I open up the top of my head and people dump it in there, is the nature of truth. And higher education, at least over the past century or so, has had a big goal of teaching critical thinking. And the folks in power don't like critical thinking, because critical thinking means you get to be critical about anything. Critical not in a sense of deriding it, but critical in a sense of trying to look through it and see what the motivation is in the speaker's heart. Why is that information being transmitted as it is? And it plays a big role now when truth can be total garbage and propaganda. And behind every piece of propaganda is power, and very often oppression. So critical thinkers in the social justice sense are those that look through proposed ideas around truth to seek out power, oppression, and oppression. Yeah, and find fault perhaps with the truth. And there's the powers that be want to be able to be the sole source of truth, and it just doesn't work in the real world. It doesn't work well for those of us that are listeners and learners. So higher education is having a pretty good impact on a lot of our students that are coming up learning to be critical thinkers, but they're learning to ask questions. They're learning to doubt. They're learning to be skeptical
But are
without
they
seeing evidence.
okay? But are they spiritual?
I don't think it has anything to do with spirituality, except those that are critical thinkers are not going to take a preacher's word for what's going to happen after they die, or not going to take the word of a book as being absolute truth. So let's talk about absolute versus relative. A relative truth is questionable. A relative truth is true depending on where you sit and what what you're swimming in. But that's not what the people in power want us to exist in. They would rather that we trust implicitly the information that we're being fed instead of question it and look for motivation. Now, how else that has effect on the development of spirituality, Parker Palmer would talk about that, and a lot of other folks would talk about how spirituality helps one develop moral character, and part of having moral character is learning to take a critical perspective, is learning to weigh information and to come to your own sense of truth.
Well, I'm curious, again, to open this up to other people, and in particular, those people here that have children. And, how did you deal with, because I think the spiritual question has to be answered here. It's part of it's what we're doing. We're moving in the spiritual direction. So what have we done, or what haven't we done that has allowed families to allow the spiritual aspect of life to be marginalized in favor of the intellectual or the vocational or something like that, that it's all bent on money and having a career and so on, rather than being a complete human being?
Well, that just goes back to the afflicted emotions. There's nothing mysterious about that. It's not something that happened yesterday.
Well, I'm looking at it from a practical point of view. How do we let this happen? And what can we do to get it back on track? Because it's not, for us here, it's an easier job because we all have an interest in it. But how do we then affect other people or influence other people to begin to look into this? That's what I'm trying to get to. Is it just a simple answer? Well, we fix ourselves, and then because of what we do, then that's going to generate our sphere of influence in that direction, and people pick up on it on its own.
Well, that's what you said earlier.
Well, I think it's good to have and some people would argue this, but I think it's good to have a plan. Go ahead, Kate.
I agree with much of what's already been stated, especially with the vertical and horizontal learning, content nurturing. I think both are absolutely applicable and necessary in providing the most amount of information to essentially casting out a larger net to reach more people. And how do we do that? It is all intertwined, because if we see everyone truly as equal, then information should be readily available and accessible to the masses. And there's many layers involved with that, right? The internet has absolutely provided a huge medium or method in distributing information. But then there's also how accurate is that information that you're receiving. And so therefore the established institutions that pass information along is necessary. There has to be checks and balances with all of that. I think if we can somehow ensure that we are passing as truthful and as open of information as possible to the younger generation, because they're the future. They will be in our positions one day. So for me, from my perspective, it only makes sense to give the next generation tools so they are better than me. So they make this world, help make this world better than what it is now. And I think I don't think it would take a lot to get there. But I also really wanted to make a comment about the heart blessings equals mind goes blank. I really thought that was interesting, because there is a lot of learning that goes involved with quiet and observing one in their natural existence. And I speak from the mother-child relationship. A baby knows absolutely nothing. They're a blank slate, and so they learn by watching initially, and you see those connections happening, and it gives purpose to passing along information to that generation that's coming up, because you see the value and how important making those strong initial foundational connections are, and making sure that the information you pass along is correct and is from the heart and makes them a better human being, so they have a solid foundation to make decisions in which they can express themselves correctly and make great decisions for the world. And I'm gonna stop talking, so thank you.
Very good. I think that's very good. Thank you. Does somebody else have?
Well, I think I appreciate what Kate said, and we're throwing out these distinctions, or I was, nurturant and content and so on. Another one is the difference between training and education. And theoretically, what training is training is to make people more alike, in the sense that they're being equipped. You're equipping learners to fit somebody else's preconceived model of what's necessary for production somewhere. You're not teaching them, as Michael said, to think for themselves.
So it's task oriented?
Task oriented, but training is usually to equip somebody to fit somebody else's larger purpose. I mean, go into the army, go into a industrial plant. I mean, learn how to do something that's laid out for you to do. Don't question it. Don't think about it. Don't try to make sense of it.
All right. So then what's the education part of it?
Education is, well, I mean, I think it's an overstatement. I've heard it said training is to make people more alike. Education is to make people more different. I don't know that I'd accept that latter part completely, but it is to prepare, well, to expose people to a realm of knowledge that they can then construct, that they can then extend and apply on their own. And where I come out with it and where you come out with it may not be the same place. But I think to get more into spiritual development, we've got to get more into education and less into training. I mean, we've got to grow the whole person, independent of society's needs for somebody to do a particular job. And when we develop the whole person, I think that's spiritual development. I think it's the opening to spiritual development, the opportunity for spiritual development.
Really wasn't intending to say anything tonight, but here, Ed, high five.
Huh.
I am I am made afraid by what I see happening with education becoming about teaching a particular set of beliefs. And the fight right now, my son is in high school, and the fight right now in the schools seems to have to do with whose beliefs we're going to force them to learn, not for them to learn to be critical thinkers.
Right. Right.
And I believe fundamentally that the drive to indoctrinate our children affects them neurologically. It makes them followers. It makes them political followers. It makes them religious followers. And it endangers us. I would much rather see my son make choices that are completely contrary to the choices that I have made and do them for well-reasoned reasons,
Right.
than see him follow my path.
Right.
And so anytime that I see a discussion go in the direction of how can we get more people to think like us, I start to itch. I want people to be able to apply rational thought and make the choices that are appropriate for them in the lives that they're living. I want them to have access to reference material and cultural references. I teach an entire class for Jewish kids about Christianity so that they understand Christian cultural references and are prepared to deal with proselytizing. And it's one of the things that I am maybe most passionate about, is making sure that they're ready to walk up to someone who wants to tell them what to believe, and that they are prepared to handle it without being offensive, but to stand their ground on what they actually believe, even if they don't believe what we're teaching at the synagogue, right? I just don't want them to be steamrolled. And so I'm on board with that. I'd like to see education about being able to think well, not what to think, and certainly not to push a spiritual perspective. I think that people will come to that if it's appropriate to them and if they see the right role modeling.
Well, you said that a lot better than I did.
I don't think so.
I think we try to make too much education like we're teaching multiplication tables. I mean, we make it a closed system. You know, there's this that you have to learn it. We can test whether you've learned it or not. You know, then you can move on or not, depending on whether you satisfy some system's needs. But we're not developing the whole person. And as you said, we're not encouraging people to think for themselves.
I've gone back to my corner now. Bye.
Well, thank you very much for this very good discussion. And like I said, I think it's relevant to be able to understand the master, you know, and then specifically the spiritual master and the problem that the teacher has, you know, what the teacher is trying to accomplish and so on is, you know, I think that a number of the things that we've said here tonight, you know, are parallels to that, whether they're in Tibet or India, or they're in America or England or anywhere else. I think it's all part of the condition of being a human being these days, or 2,600 years ago, and how we deal with this. And so in encountering our teachers, encountering our spiritual masters, that we have more of an open mind and more of an appreciation of who they are and what they're trying to do, and trying to let that come into not just our brain, but also into our heart, because that's the mode that they are really trying to work with, is coming into the heart, is opening up the heart. They're using intelligent means to be able to do that, to get us to realize the things that are blocking us up from realizing that heart. but they are teaching from the heart. So, so all these questions were really good, and I think it's a practical way of examining what's going on, and you know what we want it to be as we move forward for ourselves and for everybody else.
Lance, I know we're over time here, but as you lead Buddhism 101, and you think of the proportions, I mean, how much of this in your design and in your objective is information transfer? I mean, there's information we have to have, and how much of it is the effort on your part to help us construct our own knowledge and our own spirituality? I mean, it clearly has both elements, but what are the proportions?
Well, I'm trying to even it out, but it's been more academic.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to, you know, that's why we started off with doing a meditation for 15 minutes or so. You know, the meditation is the part where we begin to experience that spirituality. You know, it's through that. You can't intellectualize that. You have to experience it. And the meditation is the way of being able to transcend our physical body and transcend our intellectual thoughts, to quiet them down and open up the heart center. So more and more, and as we move along in Buddhism 101, but as Buddhism 101 moves on to other things, particularly with the lamas and so on, it gets much more experiential. It gets much more, you know, meditative and so on, and teaching practice and encouraging people to develop their own practices, because that's where it becomes yours. That's where you become the embodiment of these teachings, where you become a spiritual person, not by just intellectualizing it, but by actually practicing it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. If you have more thoughts about this, I think they're great, that you should write them down, and we can share them, you know, through email or next week or something like that. But I think that these are things to come back to, and our circular teachings, we certainly will. So, I hope it gave a few ideas here. So now we, beg pardon?
Lance, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Is it possible to have, you may have a beginning class for a weekend instead of weekday in the future? It's just hard for me, I think, for a weekday. Just
I understand. Where do you live? Do you live nearby?
Yeah, Fairfax Station.
Oh, you're in Fairfax Station.
Yeah.
Well, before too long, we're going to be able to go back to Dharmasuriya. We're going to be able to open up the temple. Okay. And we're talking about having more retreat practice on the weekends, like on Saturday afternoons, Sunday afternoons. There's teachings that are going to go on during the morning time. Then we'll have a break, and then we'll have retreat practices. So there's going to be more opportunity to do that. So that's,
it's just easy to focus for the week during the weekend. And
well, I understand. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's a good question, and something that we're fully aware of.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. So now, whatever merit we have gained, whatever wisdom we have unearthed, whatever skillful means we have developed through our discussion tonight, and we now dedicate this to the enlightenment of all beings. So we go to our prayer books, and we go to page 18, and we'll recite these next dedication prayers. So as I recite this, please join along. You turn your microphones off so we don't get a lot of feedback problem, but you should be reciting these things out loud. These things are designed to be done out loud. And we can talk about the reason for that later, but understand that we need to hear ourselves say these things. We need to really fully engage with these. So recite along with me, please. And we're just doing the English in these dedication prayers. Dorje Chang, Talopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, Dormalorgampopa, Pagmadrupa, and Lordri Kumpa, please bestow upon us the most auspicious blessing of all the Kaju Lamas. By this virtue, may I achieve the all-knowing state, and may all who travel on the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death cross the ocean of samsara by defeating all enemies, confusion, the cause of suffering. Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. I pray that the Lama may have good health. I pray that the Lama may have long life. I pray that your Dharma activities spread far and wide. I pray that I may not be separated from you. As Manjushri, the warrior, realized the ultimate state, and as did Samantabhadra, I will follow in their path and fully dedicate all the merit for all sentient beings. By the blessing of the Buddha, who attained the three kayas, by the blessing of the truth of the unchanging Dharma as such, by the blessing of the indivisible Sangha order, may the merit I share bear fruit. By the virtues collected in the three times, by myself and all beings in samsara and nirvana, and by the innate word of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Trikumpa Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara. Glorious, holy, venerable, precious, kind root and lineage lamas, divine assembly of yidams and assemblies of Buddhas, bodhisattvas, yogins, yoginis, and dakinis dwelling in the 10 directions, please hear my prayer. May the virtues collected in the three times by myself and all sentient beings and samsara and nirvana and the innate word of virtue not result in the 8 worldly concerns, the 4 causes of samsara, or rebirth as a Sravaka or Pratyeka Buddha. May all mothers sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me and mine, obstructors who harm, misleading Mars, and the hordes of demons, experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may I benefit all beings with my body, speech, and mind. May the afflictions of desire, hatred, ignorance, arrogance, and jealousy not arise in my mind. May attachment to fame, reputation, wealth, honor, and concern for this life not arise for even a moment. May my mind stream be moistened by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, and through that may I become a spiritual master with good qualities equal to the infinity of space. May I gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra in this very life. May the torment of suffering not arise even at the time of my death. May I not die with negative thoughts. May I not die confused by wrong view. May I not experience an untimely death. May I die joyfully and happily in the great luminosity of the mind as such and the pervading clarity of Dharmata. May I, in any case, gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra at the time of death or in the bardo. Om, Ah, Hum. Om, Ah, Hum. Om, Ah, Hum. May my body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome. Thank you.
you.
We'll be here next week.